Hello everyone, I'm Professor Matthew Rotella, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to do barbed wire two ways. So one way is going to be where we kind of make like an image plane of barbed wire and then we feed it around what we want, and then another one is going to be where we actually model it and then do the same thing with that geometry. Uh, and I'll show you an easy way to model barbed wire as well. So first of all, yeah, let's do the image plane method. Uh, so to do this, we'll start with a plane. Now there's a few different ways we could go about this, but well, for one, let's take all of our subdivisions away to start. Because we're going to generally alter the dimensions of what's going on here. And we'll turn this into a strip in time. But first, let's just set up a render. Uh, let's get our barbed wire rendering with the transparency that we want. So first, we're going to need a texture, which I have this tiling barbed wire that I just got off of textures.com, I believe. And yeah, this will do fine for what we're working with here. So this has alpha, so it's transparent and everything, uh, and it tiles, which is exactly what we want. So I'm in Redshift at the moment, but this works literally the exact same way in Arnold. So I'll make a redshift material. I'll go to my diffuse color and I'll pick file, and then I'll grab my barbed wire tile. Okay, and now if we apply that to our tile here, and then I'll just make a dome light. We don't need any sort of lighting. I did grab an HDRI to get like dynamic light on it, but forget about it. We don't need it for this. But anyway, I'll hit render, and you'll see that what we're getting here. Well, one, our transparency isn't happening, and then you would also notice a specular value to this if I didn't have the Skydome light on, which you're not going to, unless you have, yeah, which I'm just going to turn that off for now. I'm just going to have it just be the straight diffuse, which you can add like normal maps and things like that to kind of get more breakup around the surface, but really all I'm going for with this in particular is just getting my image of the barbed wire. So basically, we need, for it to be transparent like we want, we need to get our alt alpha into the opacity, which is in Arnold. It's under the geometry section where bump mapping is, and here it's in the overall section, which is also where bump mapping is in Redshift. So I wanted to go into my opacity now. And you can see we have opacity color right here, and it won't let me just plug it into one of them. So I need to plug it individually, alt alpha, into my RG and B channels. And if for one reason or another it's like not being easy to plug in, you can always use Windows, your general editors, and go to your connection editor and use your connection editor to rather easily just click your connections together. But anyway, now that I've made that connection on my shader, I can see that I have transparency, and that's great. But now I want it to tile on top of that. So I believe it's oriented in U at the moment. So I'll go to my Place 2D texture node, and I can get it to tile a couple of ways. So if in this case I can have it tile, like if I wanted like 10 lengths of it, I can have it tile 10 times, and then that'll give me this sort of look, which doesn't look great. But then when I make it more the correct dimensions of the barbed wire, then, which will effectively distort my UVs, but in distorting my UVs in this case, I'm sort of restoring the original image, at which point, of course, if I go ahead and hit render, then I'll get my length of barbed wire. But let's say you don't like doing that method, which we can now subdivide this and feed this around something. Now, another way we could get this to tile is, well, you know what? Like I'll still distort it into the length that I want. Okay. So like if I want barbed wire that's this long, then like that's great. That's my length. That's all well and good. Okay. But yeah, now I want my UVs to not be distorted, and I'm going to want my texture to tile. So first of all, I can hit unfold in hold on. Yeah, so it's horizontal image. So yeah, I'll hit unfold along V, and then that'll give me my strip. But of course, now we're very small, and we don't really want that. So how many divisions do we want in this? Because we're going to need divisions anyway, because we need to feed this around our surface, or whatever we want it to wind around. So I'm going to use the Insert Edge Loop tool here, and I'll just crank it all the way up to 50. And then I'll insert 50 edges, and then with my Insert Edge Loop tool still selected, I'm going to come in here, like with that edge selection still made, I'm going to come in here and hit cut, so that I cut it into individual UV shells. So now each segment of my barbed wire is its own individual UV shell. So I'll go into UV shell selection mode, and oh, pardon me, I'm still in my Insert Edge Loop tool. Rookie mistake. But anyway, I'll get all of these, and since it was equally cut into these 50 subdivisions, when I stack them, it will stack them into just one perfectly neat stack. And then if I go into my align and snap and I hit normalize, then it will normalize it to this length here. And then since they're all stacked and they're perfectly matched to my edges of my 0 to 1 UV space, now each segment that I cut is its own individual segment of barbed wire. And yeah, and you can see how it wraps around the image there. Okay, but now how do I actually get my barbed wire to go, well, around something? Well, let's see. I'll turn off my UV highlighting, and I'll delete my history, freeze my transforms. Let's see, I'll close my UV editor for now. Alright, so how do I get it to go around something? For this, we're going to need to use what is typically an animation tool. So first I'll make a curve, and then, I don't know, I won't go too crazy with this. Maybe I'll just make 2 loops. And as you can see, it drew it on my ground plane, which isn't really what I want. So I gotta kind of lift these into place and become the loops of barbed wire that it was born to be, which of course you're able to like wind this around something. You can feed this however, you know, makes you happy. But so that's a rather janky loop-de-loop, but I'll make it work. Okay, so now we want it to attach this to our path. How do we do that? We go into animation, and usually when you do a constraint, you go parent to child. But since you're attaching it to something, the way they have this work is you select your object and then you attach it to your path. So you select object, then path. And you go constrain, motion path, and then attach to motion path. And this is usually used in animation because, well, if I scrub through my timeline, it will flow along the path. But you can see it moves along the path. It's oriented in the right direction, more or less, but it's not really doing what we want it to. The reason for that is that it's not a flow path object yet. And so what I want to do is I'll do constrain, and then go to the motion path section, and then hit flow path object. And then, as I scrub through, it will kind of animate along the path. Now, you'll see it's not really doing what we want still. The reason for that is because our lattice just isn't a high enough resolution. But we can go into our lattice shape here, and if we add, the more subdivisions we add into our S divisions, the better our geometry will sort of flow along the path. And if you notice things are getting particularly janky at certain areas, it's probably because it's escaping the lattice. And if you want that to not happen, you can always just change your outside lattice to all, and it'll kind of careen things back in. But anyway, with my flow functioning, my object can now, you know, go around whatever geometry I have it set to go around. And if I want, I can always make a duplicate of whatever shape I'm happy with, and the duplicate won't go along with the motion path anymore. But regardless, that gets me, you know, two lengths of barbed wire that I can work with here. Which, pardon me. I was like, why is my render busted? And then it was because I rendered it in Arnold when, of course, I meant to be rendering here in Redshift. That's not quite right either. Oh, that's because I accidentally disconnected my out alpha somehow. Must have hit undo at one point when I didn't mean to, and because basically it was blocking out two of my channels, but not the third. But yeah, now I got my two lengths of barbed wire that, you know, can more or less work. And for something like barbed wire, you're not usually getting too close to it. So something that is this really geometry conservative, like image plane stripe, can work really well. But regardless, let's say you do want something a little more robust. Let's say you want some geometry that you can go ahead and here, I'll just get rid of all of this here, which, yeah, I won't get rid of, and I'll get rid of the path too. I'll keep my base plane just for funsies. But yeah, let's say you want something that is actually modeled, something a little more robust. Well, whenever you're making something like this, you always want to think and work really modularly. So what we're going to do is we're going to build just a single length of barbed wire, and then we're going to twist it and duplicate it. Now, for something like this, again, it's still not something that you will typically be getting too close to, so I don't need too many subdivisions. Uh, I'll go for just 8, but I could probably go even less to just like 6 or even 5. Just, but I'll do 8, which is still maybe even a little high for this, but it'll work well for what we're doing here. And then subdivisions, I'll just do 10 high. And now I'll make this kind of a height that looks a little respectable. And I'm going to delete the caps, so just to make my selection a little bit easier, I will go ahead and do that. And now what we're going to do is I'm going to move this over, and now we're going to just model a couple barbs. And to do that, all I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple sections where I can have like a little more square. So I'll make a section that's towards the top, a section that's towards the middle, and then a section that's towards the bottom here. And I didn't have to place 2 loops to do that. I just was lazy. But okay. And before I make those barbs, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this just across the origin, and because I'm going to make 2 pieces of wire that then wind around each other. And so I'm going to move it across the origin. I can have it touch the origin if I want, but I'll just leave it kind of with a slight space in the middle, just for fun. Now what I'll do is I'll go to mesh, and I will mirror this, and I don't want to merge anything. And then what I'll do is, I want a copy of it, and I want it to go on the opposite side of the world axis, and I'll hit apply and mirror it so that I have my 2 binds, and this way I know that right at the very center, like right on the origin, is where I'm going to have the pivot for my twist eventually go. So anyway, have that. Delete my history after doing the mirror. Now let's make those barbs. Again, we want to stay generally low poly, so I'll make 1 barb where I'll do it like this, kind of like opposite diagonals-ish. So I'll go over here, I'll give it a thickness, I'll just go 1, and then I'll do local scale 0.1 in X and Y, so that I get kind of 2 spikes like this. And of course, you can go as robust with this as you want. You can make it too, you can model this to your heart's content. I'm just making it like as low poly as possible while still being workable. And now on this guy, I'll get these 2 faces. Once again, I'll hit extrude. I'll give it a thickness of 1, but I don't want them to stay together, so I'll uncheck keep faces together, so they extrude separately. I'll go 0.1, 0.1, like that, and I'll do the same thing at the bottom, which I could have done both of these at the same time, as a matter of fact. This time I'll do it on this side, extrude, 1, uncheck, adjust my local scale so that they become spikes, which maybe I'll even make this 0.05. I can make them, pointier, whatever. I'm not going to get too hung up on it. So I have 2 barbs. Now, I want to duplicate these so that I can get one, like I said, one long length of wire. And to do that, what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to move the pivot here to one of these bottom vertices. So I'm going to press D to use my move pivot tool. I'll hold down V to turn on vert snapping. And then, yeah, I'll snap it to this front vertice. Now, if you have transforms, it's very important right now that you freeze them so that you get base values, and then if you want, you can delete your history while you're at it too. Because what we want to do is now duplicate this and move it upwards. And we're going to snap this duplicate to the corresponding face, corresponding vertex that we did on the bottom but on the top, so that we effectively make one tile. Okay, like one extra, now it's 2 lengths long of barbed wire. And the reason why we needed to freeze our transforms and we wanted to use the snapping method was, for one, we want them to be perfectly touching, and we need to freeze our transforms because we want this number. We want to get this exact number, and which, you know, we can see is accurate to within 1,000th. And so now I can go to Edit, Duplicate Special, and from this top length of wire, I can create more. So I want to create more copies. I can use, and each copy I want to translate upwards, in this case, this number. So that's my X, Y, Z. So my translate X, I want to be this. So each copy will have this value added to it. And therefore I can input as many copies as I want. I'll stay reasonably conservative. I'll just do 10. And then I will hit duplicate special, and it will duplicate from my pivot going upwards. So now I have 11 lengths of barbed wire. However, they're not connected. And I'll save my scene real quick, just because this would be an unfortunate moment while recording for things to go awry. Alright, but now let's combine all these. So I'll go mesh, combine, which will give me all of these nasty transforms. Don't want that. And then I will say delete history, and that will delete all those nasty transforms. And, you know, I can name this barbed wire, or, you know, whatever makes sense. Barbed wire certainly makes a lot of sense. Now, of course, these are not all connected yet. Like, if I go into face selection, like, I don't, like, it stops here, because these vertices where things originally were placed, you know, that they're not together. How do we merge them? Well, they're all literally on top of each other. So I can select my entire object worth of vertices, and then I'm going to go to Edit Mesh, and then I'm going to open up my merge options. Now, this threshold is the distance something can be away from a vertex next to it, whilst so, like, if something is greater than this distance, it won't be merged. If something is lesser than this distance, it will be merged. Now, we know that these were transformed within an accuracy of 1,000th. So that means I can push this all the way to 1/1000th. So anything, any vertex that is 1/1000th of a unit away from its neighbor will not be merged. Okay, that was weird. Okay. It's a weird display error that seems to be happening. Okay, not anymore. Strange indeed. Anywho, I can hit apply, and then what I should find is that, you know, if I go into face selection mode and I double click it, that it will select every face of just one of my lengths, because these lengths aren't together. And if they did get merged together, honestly, in this case, that wouldn't be the end of the world. But this teeny tiny space between them is enough to make sure they didn't get merged together. Okay, but now I said I was going to braid these wires around each other. So how do I go about doing that? Well, that's pretty straightforward. I just select them, deform, nonlinear, and I make a twist. And it'll make my twist handle. And the twist handle might not be where I want. But you know what I can do? I can, since I mirrored these, I know that my twist should be happening exactly on the origin. So I can go ahead and just take my translate X and Z to be 0. And now I know that it's perfectly centered between my two lengths of barbed wire. And now I can adjust my twist, moving them in opposite directions of each other, and now they will wind around each other as they go. Now, this might not be enough twist, but I'm not limited to what's here. I can change this to 2000 and negative 2000, and then if that's not enough, you know, I can keep going, keep doubling that, basically twisting it until I get, you know, deformations that I don't much care for, because I just don't have enough geometry to support that level of twisting. So, you know, maybe I'll kind of wind these back towards each other some, and that's an acceptable level of twisting. All right, so I got my barbs, and it's all connected, and now I don't want it to be affected by the twist handle anymore. So I can either make a duplicate, or I can delete the history, and then it won't be, and that will delete my twist handle. In this case, it can be a really good idea to just make a duplicate and hide the original, because if you ever want to have a straight length of barbed wire again, this is going to be your only backup, unless you, of course, kept that original length of barbed wire as its own duplicate way back when, so that you kind of have like a record of your work. Anyway, it's time to make this a flow path object as well, and I'll save just in case. Probably don't have to, but whatever. Alright, so now, once again, I'll go ahead and I'll make a couple loops. I'll just go 1, and then I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4 for the loop. 1, 2, 3, 4, and loop. And 1, 2, 3, 4, and loop. And I don't know if I'll even rightly get around 3 loops, but whatever. Let's stand these up. And yeah, I'll grab these two. And yeah, just kind of move this around. So that I can kind of get this twisty turny, loop it through each other, whatever. I'm not going to get too hung up on it. Point is, you can wind this around whatever you want. Anyway, here we go again. Select the mesh, which, I'll make sure, okay. Select the mesh, select the path, animation, constrain, motion path, attach to motion path, and now if I look at this, I'll see that it's not orienting itself the way I want. And but if I go to my motion path settings, I can change how it's oriented. Basically, I want it's oriented upwards. So that means I want my front axis, which is where it will aim, I want that to be Y. I can make my up axis Z or X, but my front axis should be Y. And now it will aim itself along the path, which is exactly what I want. And now I can finally select it, select the object, go to constrain, make it a flow path object, and it's doing wild things because it's so much longer than the path. But again, like I said, I can change this to all, and that will kind of wind everything in. And if things are escaping the lattice, that'll also give you some really wild transformations. The better it flows with the lattice, the better you'll get. So I'll give this a lot of T divisions, which will give my object all of the resolution it needs. And I can see in this case, my object is actually flowing along and is much longer than my curve, which to that degree, I can even go ahead and just scale my curve upwards or outwards, or whatever I want, make it longer in order to fully accommodate my length of barbed wire. And I can kind of get it right in the middle, scale it down until it just hits both ends, whatever I need to do. I can even scale my object once it's in here, which if I go ahead, which let's say, I make this bigger, and then if I want to get my barbed wire and scale it, and if I wanted it to be, twice as long, then, well, actually no, that doesn't work. I was thinking back to a trick I used for an animation before, but I was making something that was 0, and then I was turning it into its normal length, and that was, and then that allowed me to make like an object appear out of nowhere and then flow along a path. But that is not what we're doing here. But I could scale it in Y and shrink it down if I wanted, and then scale it back out. So I'm not lying when I say you can scale it. But still, of course, that will distort our mesh. But anyway, once I'm happy with my barbed wire, like I said, I can always duplicate it, and now it's in that shape. And it's still pretty low poly, which is good. We want to stay conservative, like I said. And because, even as conservative as I stayed, this is still at 3,000 faces for this length of barbed wire, which is why a lot of times when you're making something like this, you either, just use a polyplane, or you even take these subdivisions down to just like 6 across or something like that, so you don't have to get too crazy. But you still need enough to be able to support this level of bending and twisting. So I don't know, find your happy medium, whatever that may be. Okay. Well, that's it. Barbed wire 2 ways.